Hello, everybody. Welcome to tonight's session of the IAGC Business Hub. We are meeting on May 5th, 2021. We still have one or two more people dropping in, but let's start anyway. You know our regular drill. We have one speaker invited. Today, the wonderful Ann Sophie Cremers. No pressure on having the best talk ever, Ann Sophie. So
I hate
so wonderful
already.
to have you here.
Work. Thank you, Phil.
And Ann Sophie is a complete cosmopolitan. She sent me her bio, and it goes from NGOs to industry. It goes from having degrees in several directions. I need to look at this French and Italian literature, comparative literature, but also law and diplomacy. And she's traveled the world. So there you can read work in Tokyo, work in Kazakhstan, Morocco, Algeria. And she ran into, well, our kind of business, I'd say. Generative Coaching 2016, NLP Master Practitioner 2014 in Santa Cruz, Equi-Coaching, an additional item to be mentioned for sure. And she has brought the world of generative coaching to Belgium together with other generative coaches, of course, but Belgium is where you're at right now.
Correct.
And today we're going to hear, let me get this right, generative coaching, a tight suit or high heels shouldn't stop you from moving.
Amazing.
And as usual, the typical structure that we give that you can happily deviate from would be it's 20 minutes presentation, it's 20 minutes discussion more on the topic that you're presenting, and it's 20 minutes general discussion, and then a few closing remarks from our side. And well, that's the invitation, and whatever you in the field will carry us through will be what we need tonight. So enjoy, everybody, and the floor is yours.
Sounds good. Thank you. Just for the sake of honesty, the title, I think, Till, if I'm not mistaken, came from you, right? Do I get that right? Because we spent a couple of nights thinking about what the hell am I going to be talking about? And then I sent some general descriptions to Till, and in this kind of a generative co-creative effort, Till came up with the marvelous idea of a tight suit shouldn't stop you from moving. I thought, you know, we need to be a bit gender sensitive, so I added the high heels, but there we go. So actually, you know, really thrilled to be able to do this with you. Honestly, from my side, I mean, looking at Michael, I mean, there's so many people here. I'm really not sure if I'm doing anything different from any of you. So really interested to also find out from you what your practices are. But yes, as Till said, I'm today primarily a coach, a facilitator, a team coach in the Belgian corporate world. And one of the reasons I wanted to give you this talk is I think like all of us, I keep attending these classes. You know, I go to Creative Mind, I go to Generative Coaching 1 time, twice, 3 times. And I feel like I'm constantly filling my backpack with all these amazing tools. And then I go to my clients in this corporate world and I'm faced with a reality that is so different from the reality that we often encounter in these classes, where we practice with experienced coaches, we practice with therapists, and we have this really welcoming, you know, sort of audience to bring all of these tools to, but our real clients and the world that they live in is very different. And as a coach, I'm very often sort of constantly thinking about how can I bring the corporate world in which I work and make a living? How can I bring all of that emotional intelligence and all of that generative creativity to that world? And so hence the title. The picture is one of the people I coached a couple of years ago. Was kind of a pretty high level director in the banking world that for the first 4 sessions that we met, every single time I asked her, how do you feel? She's like, I have no idea how I feel. Okay, take it easy. So it took quite a bit of, you know, breathing. It took a lot of walks in the woods. It took the horse to finally get to, you know, sort of a discussion where we could start talking about how you feel. And so this is why I wanted to do this session, to sort of kind of explain a bit to you how I bring generative coaching to the corporate world, because I really have no clue as to whether it's the right way. And I'm really interested in also learning from you guys. So maybe just to introduce myself a little bit more, I'm bringing different parts of myself to my coaching. The one that's always present is my little one, you know, the little anxious one, the worried little child in me that wants to get it right. So she's always walking by my side. But I've also created myself a very beautiful looking, that's not me, but I've created myself a very beautiful looking future me. This is my 70-year-old self. And I sort of want to be, the intention I have more and more is to, at the current age of 55, walk around the corporate world as a sage, you know, loving, wise crone. You know, there's something about older women. I see myself as a dancing gypsy sometimes, and sometimes as this kind of warmly smiling woman who just wants to bring wisdom. Not there yet, but that's the aspiration. And so both of them are constantly with me when I'm doing my coaching. And this is a world that I live in and work in. So these are some of the clients that I work for. Some of them you will probably recognize because they're a little bit more international clients. Some of them are typically Belgian clients. It's a real mix of, you know, telecom, banking, publishing, insurance, hospital, large utility company, healthcare sector, technological, sort of high-tech companies, again, financial. So it's a really mix of very different companies going from relatively small, you know, this one would be about 2,000 people, this one would be about 150,000 people. So there's a real mix there in terms of sectors and sizes. There's the caring people in the hospital, and there's the high-level engineers in the utility companies. So I really work in a very big mix of industries and corporations. And this, and Michael and Alessandra, please compliment if you see it differently. I'm Flemish, so I'm from the Flemish side of the country. I work in Brussels most of the time. I work across the two cultures in Belgium. I work in Paris a lot as well. But the culture that I often encounter in Belgium is pretty sort of no nonsense. You know, it's kind of very pragmatic, particularly the, you know, very hardworking people. No frills. That's a little bit typical of Belgium. I think I'm kind of looking at Michael because now he can contradict me. But they sort of tend to fly with proven methods. You know, you don't have to bring us anything too fancy. It's just like the traditional, conservative, proven methods. Let's just not spend too much money on all this consulting, coaching, business. Let's just get on with life. Very rational, focused on logic and facts. And from a personal point of view, quite guarded. These are not people that have their heart on their tongues, right? It's sort of, there's a bit of a wall there. Yeah, so not that easy to get people to divulge about emotions. I'm just looking at Alessandra, seeing her head. Do you agree with that, Alessandra? Okay, good. And Michael, as a fellow Belgian, anything to add from your point of view?
No, I agree with that.
Okay, cool. So just to tell you, from the world of generative coaching that we all know and love and cherish to this world, from my experience, there's a bit of a gap there. And this is what I'm constantly struggling with. How do I bridge that gap? Obviously, what I'm bringing is what we all bring. You know, the usual techniques, presence, focus on mind, body, heart, you know, the drill. But what I encounter is on the right-hand side. And if I look at the clients, the corporation, then very often there's quite a high degree of skepticism, quite a high degree on just rational ways of thinking, pretty wary of everything that's creative, not so much in tune with emotions and body. There's a big focus on the outer game. And usually when we talk about whether it's training or coaching, there's a big managerial expectation of outcome, you know, very strongly focused on behavior, on situations. And another struggle is the number of hours, particularly if I look at coaching, is relatively limited. The typical coaching process here in Belgium, unless you guys do it differently, but that's for me, about 10, maximum 12 hours of coaching. It becomes difficult to negotiate beyond that. The clients I meet are very often already quite in a crash state, quite rational, quite focused on their mind, not always even aware of the fact that they're a bit stuck, that they're in a crash state. The first sessions when I meet them, if I don't intervene, I'm going to get a whole lot of externalized self-talk without the capacity to observe. And they're not very equipped when it comes to emotional intelligence. And so that's kind of the gap that I'm constantly working on. Yeah, everybody okay with that? I'm just kind of checking in. You're good? Okay, cool. So what I wanted to do with you is just kind of bring you some experiments. You know, since 2016, when I was first trained in generative coaching, I've just kind of been constantly thinking, how do I bring this? And I just wanted to bring you some examples of things that I've done at a group level, so group coaching processes, and then also maybe some techniques from an individual coaching process. So two of my experiments, I designed one program for women in leadership, which was completely based on the 6 steps from generative coaching. And I also did some resilience workshops for nurses and personnel from the hospital that I work at in May to kind of help them build resilience. And those for me were just experiments. You know, they were kind of like just checking things out and seeing how that worked. If I look at the Women in Leadership program, this was for a big US company. So the objective of the program was to basically manage. Actually, when the client called me, they said, we just want to do something for women, do something for women. I was like, okay, what are we going to do for women? And they said, can't you think of some skills that women need? We want to help women leaders. We want to help female leaders. Don't they generally lack strategic skills and networking skills? And I thought, interesting perspective. So I kind of got in touch with the HR people. I said, look, I really don't think that there's something specific from a skills point of view that we lack. I would much rather work with women on what's holding them back. So let's work on the shift that women need to make so that they actually come forth as stronger leaders. Would that be okay with you? And the HR people were kind of quite progressive. Also, this was budgeted by their leadership, Women in Leadership program, not by the business. So that opened up quite some creative possibilities. And we decided to go for something completely new, where we dropped all of the traditional skills building, and we just went for a self-development program where we would work with just a limited group of women on identifying internal obstacles and trying to find a shift. So working with resources to transform the obstacles. The challenge was, this was a pharmaceutical company, so very scientific people. The people I was working with were young and somewhat less young women, but with high degrees in science, you know, doctors in chemistry, biology, very rational. American company, so very strong focus on outer game. There was a massive reorganization right in the middle of the program where all of a sudden they started firing people left and right. So I was getting people into the program which were really traumatized because they didn't know if they were going to get their job, if they were going to lose their job the next day. And we also, as usual, had a very limited budget and time. So what we designed was a kind of a, if I counted correctly, 6-day program. We had a bit of a kickoff session, and then basically step by step with this group of women, I each time introduced the basic principles of generative coaching. So for example, in the first module, I introduced some notions of inner game. I helped them set leadership intentions. We started introducing the notion of backpack and exploring resources. Worked with a lot of creative techniques on that. The second module, we did some equi-coaching. So I work with horses quite a bit. So I invited them for a day of equi-coaching, and that's when we started connecting with emotions, started identifying obstacles, what's holding me back. We started focusing on self-observation, identifying triggers. And then I brought them back for 2 sort of peer coaching days where each time we worked on very specific obstacles and how to transform the obstacles. And at the end, we did a return day for everybody to come back in and do some exercises on anchoring. Now, when we invited them, these women, to the program, they kind of had no clue that this is what we're going to do with them. So it was kind of a step-by-step discovery. I had some women coming in there saying, I have no clue what I'm doing here. You know, this sort of exercise is not for me, but gradually they kind of got there. So what we did together was basically, the way we sold it was to say, this is not a one-size-fits-all program. It's each woman working on her own obstacles. I did make it very clear to the management that we were going to work on emotional intelligence, resilience, and creativity. We did focus on the fact that this is not training, it's a group coaching process. And we also made the promise that we would give them some tools so that afterwards they could keep up some of the self-coaching. And here's some pictures. We spent a lot of time outdoor. So what did I do with them? I did a lot of exercises around coach state. So we really focused a lot on the inner game. I introduced it starting with inner game, and then we gradually got into the language of coach state. We gradually moved into somatic exercises. I'm a 5 rhythm dancer, so I introduced quite some exercises from the 5 rhythm dancing, gently, not too harshly, but very gently. And we also used some techniques from from Theory U, does something called 3D sculpting, which is really useful when you want to express an intention. So we use some of the visual exercises also to help with setting an intention. Based on this first day and a half, they were kind of okay. They were starting to see it. We then got them into the equi-coaching. And for the equi-coaching, I use this amazing facility somewhere in Flanders with, as you see, beautiful barns and really cool horses. And this is where these scientists discovered feelings. You know, there were literally two women standing in a corner, really afraid of the horse. But for them, it was a discovery of, this is what fear does to my body. So that was a starting point. There was one woman in there who's a very Cartesian. She really didn't believe any of this, as you know, this was to her all bullshit, basically, until in one game, we were just kind of working with the horse in the group setting. She was expressing that she didn't believe any of this, that she was really demotivated in the group. And all of a sudden the horse walks up to her, gives us a little nudge and a little hug, and she was all of a sudden, she saw the light. So it's almost like the equi-coaching was really, really critical in getting these quite rational women in touch with feeling. So this allowed us to explore a whole lot of things around the more somatic part of coach state, the somatic part of crash state, and learning how to recognize both. Everybody okay with this? You're okay with that? Okay, cool. So with this program, actually, this was the first time I'd done this. I think we started in 2017, so 1 year after, I think, my generative coaching. We had 3 repeat years. So basically everybody was incredibly positive about this program. People came back 2 years later for a return day. So it really created quite a buzz that this was a very effective program for quite a lot of these women. And they really walked away with quite a toolkit. So whenever I got back in touch with them, I got the feedback back that they were still continuing to use concepts like coach state, you know, the resources, the archetypes, they were continuing to use that. So kind of backed by this, when COVID hits, I got a call from the hospital that I work with saying, hey, our doctors and nurses are basically, they're done for. We need to show some support. Could you do anything? So I created again a program for both the nurses, the doctors, but also some of the people working in the cleaning and logistical facilities. And we kind of did a voluntary 3-module resilience workshop. And again, this was again a difficult environment because people were incredibly tired. They were very emotional. They were basically completely depleted. Also very limited in terms of time because there was just no time to do anything. And also an audience, you wouldn't think so, but again, the emotional equipment, you know, from an emotional intelligence point of view was quite low. And so I started at an even lower pace. So the first workshop we did, I call this, I very often use the language of the client that I'm working with. So the first module we did is what I call the amygdala emergency intervention. This was just allowing them to vent, you know, just kind of sit in trios and just vent, vent, vent. And then I said, okay, enough venting, you know, we give them some instructions on what are you feeling, where in the body, etc. I got them up on their feet and I do an exercise that I usually, it's a 5 rhythm exercise. I actually learned that from Deborah Bacon-Dilts at the time, where you just get them up and you say, guys, move, you know, and I put lots of obstacles in the room and I said, just move. I play some music and I just let them move. And obviously when they're faced with an obstacle, they go out of the way and they go to another place. And then you make them think about that and say, hey, your feet know the way. When you're blocked before an obstacle, you know where to go where there is space. Somehow in our mind, we don't have the same agility. And it creates this kind of a moment of observation where they realize I'm stuck and I'm actually choosing to stay stuck. Once they got that, we then do what I call, I give them some neurocognitive. I very often use some neurocognitive basics to sort of explain some of this stuff. And then we did a prefrontal out of the box workshop where together they were looking for reframing, you know, how to look differently at the situation. How could I deal differently with the situation? All of this, again, to constantly give them some tooling for when you're stuck. How can you realize and recognize that you're stuck? And how can you get moving again? And then in the additional workshops after that, we started going a bit deeper on somatics, how to hold difficult emotions, mental reframing. But once we got them on that little moment of how to take some distance, how to observe yourself, how to realize that you're stuck, then basically everything flowed. And I was amazed again at how people with very different levels of emotional intelligence equipment, they were willing to go with this. Were they all fully equipped after that? No, but it definitely helped them kind of get through the exercise. Yeah, everybody okay with this? You good? Okay, cool. So this is as far as the experiments go from group coaching. Obviously, I'm still doing some, but these are key. From an individual coaching point of view, what are some techniques I play with there? As much as possible, I get people out of the office. I take them walking. Obviously, I continue to do equi-coaching. I use a lot of somatic exercises when we're out, and I continue to do a lot of visual anchoring. And I've realized that with coaching, the way I bridge the gap very often, there's this pre-contracting phase where I need to sit with the clients. And very often this is a senior manager or the HR manager, and they're interested in getting my services as a coach. And I need to sell myself, right? Very often there, I just speak the language of the client. So it's a lot of pacing and leading. With senior managers, I very often will use the corporate language. I will focus on the outer game. And very gradually, I'll start switching and introducing language related to making an internal shift. Actually, I have a small consulting company. We talk about leader shift. So it's basically to draw attention to the need to shift something internally if you want to get the outer game under control. If I do talk about emotions, it's using the classical emotional intelligence language. And I find that the corporate world kind of reacts well to that. Once I have the contract, yippee, then we usually have sort of an alignment session with the manager, the coachee, and the HR people. And that's when I start shifting more. So we'll still talk outer game. We'll talk about very deeply about how the manager sees the workplace reality. I'll try to get very specific information. What's the behavioral change that you want to see? But then again, we'll start introducing the need to look at the internal shift. And I start introducing notions of inner game. I start to link it with thinking and feeling. And usually that's okay. It's only when I have the coachee with me that then we really go full-blown 6-step. But again, very gradually, I really pace and lead with the person I have in front with me. We usually start from workplace. We usually start from the outer game. And very gradually, I take them along with me so that we can actually apply the different techniques. Usually then when we do the debriefing, that's for me kind of gold, because then we can actually inform the manager of what we've done. So gradually, because I often coach this, different people in one organization, every single time we have an opportunity to debrief, I can then kind of pedagogically introduce sort of the next layer. So I'll explain to the manager what we've done, and I'll explain to the HR people what we've done. And you see that gradually they're starting to get it. So the next one I coach, I have to do less explanation because they already know what we're doing. Does that make sense for everybody? So you're kind of virally building layer above layer, and gradually you see that it's the little seeds that your plants will take. So what I've learned about bringing, generative coaching is basically, for me, it's very gradual. It's a step-by-step approach where I really need to adapt to the reality and the pace of the client. Some clients I can start working with somatic exercises, session 1. Sometimes it takes me 3 sessions before I get there because there's such an amount of resistance there. I find that compared to what we do, in our generative coaching classes, I have to put on so many different hats. I do put on my generative coaching hat, of course, but I do have quite some experience as a people manager myself, and I have to constantly be able to link back to the behavioral hat because they can't lose connection with the workplace. So it's constantly switching between the internal shift, but also bringing it back to your workplace reality. And at the same time, I do need to put my teaching hat on quite a bit because I do want them to be able to take some of these techniques later on and use them themselves. So I'm actually spending quite some time afterwards or in between explaining what we're doing and why we're doing it so they can actually use it afterwards. And for me, it's all about finding that one sweet spot. And very often it's like one moment where they get it, where they sort of understand what you're doing, where there's the first time taking that bit of distance and they can observe their own patterns and they're starting to identify these internal voices and they get it. And that's when you see that they can start actually creating new possibilities. And usually to get there, this is what I need to do. I need to lean in a lot. I'm mirroring quite a bit. I'm more and more being quite provocative and challenging, using my sense of humor, but also really giving feedback. I'm really encouraging a lot of attention to self-observation, also somatically and emotionally. I'm using their language. For example, one person I was coaching recently is a mom of 4 kids. And we were talking about one of her younger parts that constantly wants to brainstorm creatively. She's not delivering anything. She's not finishing anything. She's never landing. She's constantly diverging and discussing and everything. And we were able to bring that back to sort of the creative part of her, you know, so a younger part of her that constantly wants to play and have fun. And then once we started talking about that, she's like, well, I got it. She's like, I'm a mom of 4 kids, right? I'm just going to treat that younger part as one of my kids. When one of my kids comes up and says, Mom, I want some attention, I'll gently say to that kid, I love you, but not right now. And once she got that, she was out, right? Another guy I'm coaching is working for an IT company. With him, we talked about his younger parts as program and default programs and, you know, so using more of an IT language, but anything to kind of get them to go along with you until they find that sweet spot. And I also had to learn to be far more courageous. So really sort of pushing them to try things, you know, even if everything in them, particularly the Belgians being quite shy and reserved. So sometimes just really pushing them to use certain techniques. I did go back to my coachees and ask them. So I wrote to about 40 of my coachees with whom I've used generative coaching and asked them, what did you find helpful during the coaching? And what are you continuing to use today? And I was really dreading the results, honestly, because I was like, oh my God, this is going to be terrible. But actually, it wasn't so bad. So I was like, okay, cool. I got 24 responses, I think, in total, which isn't bad. I think out of 40, I was like, cool. And I can see that, you know, at least they still knew what the techniques were. So I figured that's already cool. They haven't forgotten. But there's some that really resonate, like coach state comes back quite strongly. Setting an intention overall comes back quite strongly. I have a lot of people who are still using the backpack, the resources, the talents, the archetypal energies, actually, to my surprise, was quite strong. And also everything related to triggers. Inner voice is also a bit more difficult. If I look at what they're still using today, then that was not so bad either, right? So coach state is clearly something that they're still using, the capability of just kind of breathing in and kind of coming home. Identifying negative patterns. The one that's still weak is the somatic part. So really using the body doesn't come out very strongly. So what this taught me is that as a coach, I'm not doing so badly. After all, I got a score out of 4.5 out of 5. So I thought, okay, not a complete disaster. So that was kind of reassuring. What's working is helping others get to that moment of observation, getting people to recognize that there's this moment of pause that they can take to identify the trigger, to identify the response and figure out that they have a choice. I'm having some success in helping them create some practices for coach state, but there's obviously quite some things that I could do more for sustainability, for anchoring and all of that. I'm going a bit quickly till, because I realize time's up. They also gave me some suggestions as to what we could do to make it even more impactful. So they said we would love during the coaching process to have more feedback from stakeholders. Obviously, they'd love more session. Yes, they want more frequent interactions, but they also wanted a lot more access to self-development, and they'd like to continue that. So it was really a strong call for, even when the coaching is done, what can we do to give you access to a community of learners, to give you access to material, you know, don't drop us, let's keep something going. So what I have learned from all of this, and thank you to Till and John for pushing me to do this, because otherwise I probably wouldn't have thought about this, but what I've learned about this, baby steps, you know, it's sort of everybody does this at their own rhythm. And if I can just plant seeds with every coaching and every coaching helps them take one step forward, then honestly, I'm happy. Let go of my own expectations too. So just be gentle with myself in this whole process. And I am seeing the corporate world evolving. I mean, I just had sessions today with senior leaders in the company that I did the Women in Leadership program in. I don't know if COVID played a role in that, maybe, probably. But all of a sudden, I can talk in a larger group of companies about mental health. I can talk about coach states. All of a sudden, we're talking about feelings. All of a sudden, we're talking about body. So it seems like the whole subject is taking on the next level at this point. So I'm continuing at this point. Every training I give, every workshop I do, I'm basically sprinkling seeds. I'll introduce something, whether it's coach state or intention setting or whatever. I'm basically kind of massaging the whole thing. So at some point, hopefully there will be more. And it did make me think that I need to rethink my coaching process so I can improve it. So this whole thing gave me quite some ideas on something I could do to at least build more durability into it. Voila, this is all I wanted to share with you. I see that there's some comments or questions in the chat. So
in the chat, yeah, but Ann Sophie, before we go to the question first,
yes,
thank you very much. Thank you so much for the presentation. I loved it. I loved many of the images that you gave us, starting from the hand and the brain and the heart holding hands when they walk along, and what of course touches me strongly is the be gentle with myself piece, as this is certainly an item that probably not only I have encountered as one of the obstacles that we need to transform into resources. Francis dropped a question in the chat box during the talk, towards the end of it. Francis, would you like to just maybe state your question verbally, or would you prefer me to read it?
I don't know if Francis...
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was going to, sorry, thank you. That was great fun altogether. I really enjoyed it. And also I was struck by the amount of energy and input you put into it as well. And if you're anything like this, like you're on Zoom, if you're anything like that on real life, whatever obstacles or resistance you meet, they'll be crushed right away, I imagine. But to come back to my question, which was, you mentioned resistance, and I was just curious, I'm assuming that you've done other forms of group work, other forms of coaching prior to generative coaching. And I just really wanted to get a sense of a comparison. Was the kind of resistance you normally get in these settings the same or more with what you're doing now? And I just was curious as to, if so, why that was the case.
Hang on, please, Ann Sophie. Could I request, before you answer the question, to maybe stop sharing, that we get the gallery view with everybody? If that's okay.
Yes. There you go.
Thank you.
Depending on the individual, but yes, when I did get resistance on generative coaching, it was generally stronger than on any other kind of coaching that I would have done that was maybe more behavioral, and it was primarily resistance to some of the techniques that we were using, even though I was trying to always use a variety of techniques, because I kind of figure, people are sensitive to different techniques. Some like meditation, some like horses, but in any case, you're going deeper in the somatic and you're going deeper in the emotional realm of things. And that's where I got most of the resistance. Like this one woman that, we saw the picture up the front, she at some point, all she wanted to do with me was vent, right? She just wanted to talk. And I was constantly holding her back and saying, hey, let's breathe. And I could feel her frustration because I was stopping her self-talk. And I was trying to get her to connect with her feeling. And she's like, I don't want to connect with my feelings. So it was really strong resistance that I wouldn't normally get in another coaching process, also because I probably wouldn't be pushing that hard. Don't know, Francis, if that answers your question. But it was more at that level because we were going deeper in terms of somatic practices and connecting with feeling.
Yeah, and I think I was struck. I got a real visual of all the Belgians dancing the 5 rhythms with you, and being resistant to that as well. Yeah.
But they were. Yeah, I did one session once with a publishing company where I introduced 5 rhythm and yoga as a way to introduce coach states, and they were distinctly uncomfortable. I made a note to self never to repeat in this environment.
Thank you very much,
right.
and Sophia. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Because I did want to put you in a breakout so that you can maybe think about, are there any other practices that you can share back or any other reflections? Till, would that be okay to put them in? Yes, Dermot.
Just Ann Sophie, that was just lovely. It was really fantastic, brilliant.
Thank you.
But would you have any more comments on? I'm struck by this idea that you're quite careful in how you pace the introduction of methods that you think might be a little bit more alien to your audience. Yeah. So would you say any more about that? Just something very short, maybe.
Sure.
But
well, I'm just thinking of one. I work this hospital I work with. I'm currently coaching the CEO of the hospital, and with her, I can actually go quite far in somatic language and talking about internal voices, or internal parts. But the first time we talked, she was sort of like, oh, we don't need to do that here, because if you talk to such and such about that, he's just gonna freak. And I could just see her own language sort of don't go there. And it's really that sort of thing, whereas when I pace it, and so we do it at their rhythm, and I can kind of gradually see entryways. If I go slow, I don't get that kind of harsh resistance. It goes slower. I mean, is that correct in English? So I need more time, but I find that if I land some of these things straight, then it's a block. They wouldn't want to follow.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Sophie, just amazing. You just covered so much in such a short period of time. It's so much energy. It was amazing.
Thank you, John.
I'm just thinking about how I think you said you like to get people out of the office, and obviously you use the horses as one example. Can you just tell us a bit about how you've gone from that first example you had of the woman who's kind of like, don't go there, we don't talk about that kind of response, to actually getting them out of the office?
Generally, I start with walking, and that's something they're usually quite open to. If I just introduce it as, I usually pace it in a way that the first session is usually in the office, because that's also for me, I need to get the rational stuff out of the way. I need to explore, and that's when we talk workplace, situational behaviors, and that gives me a general feel for things. And then usually when I feel like we've got that rational part out of the way, under control, I will usually say, hey, let's go walk. And usually they're quite open to that. So by the time we do that, we've very often already kind of laid the groundwork and done some exploring. I've mapped in my head what's going on, what do I see, and then I can just kind of go walking with them. And that allows me then to also, again, kind of do a bit more of a deep dive, because I already know what's going on in the workplace. I actually draw a lot, which is my thing. When I'm listening to somebody, I doodle a lot. It's my way of, and I also find that sometimes I just need to go sit down with them, because I feel like I need to draw something. And usually they love that, because then they take pictures of my drawings and it's an anchor for them. So it's really kind of trying to see, where are we at in the interaction, and where are they at, and what would be now the format that suits the best. Sometimes I shock them. I once was coaching somebody who is this high level executive, and as I was listening to her, it was all outer game, workplace, challenge here, budget there, nya, nya, nya. And I was like, God, all I could hear in my head was blah, blah, blah. And I just couldn't stop her. So then I just said, hey, how about we just go work with the horses next summer? She's like, yes, let's go. Because she's kind of, risk taker. And I just put her in the meadow, and she stopped doing blah, blah, blah. It's just kind of, you can't keep doing that when you're in the horse and with the horse in the meadow. Then it's all feeling and touching. And so it just kind of brings the blah, blah back to, what am I feeling? So I kind of have to feel with every person what's going to work.
Yeah, sure. It's amazing the power of the change of scene, change of landscape, isn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah. And it's really, for some people, I coach this one guy in a media company, and he's a real bulldog. He has this reputation of being a real kind of, he came to me because there were complaints up to the highest level. He's about to get fired because he was such a bulldog, and they'd given him feedback for ages. And we knew each other, so he trusted me, and we just went walking in Tervuren, which I think Alessandra and Michael would know, Park van Tervuren. And the first session we did was in the actual media company, and we talked about the feedback he'd received, and there I was being very strong with him, saying, this is the feedback, so we need to work this. From there on, he relaxed, and then we've been for walks now for hours, and he just completely calms down. So it's an engineer, so when I take him out of this multimedia company, he's just a different person, and it's really allowed him to just relax and take the feedback and work it. So it's really the change of scenery very often, which just completely changes the dynamic also between us.
Totally can relate. The same if you put, you know, give somebody a sword in the hand or put them into an Aikido dojo. A different environment, so they're automatically out of their comfort zone anyway. So, well, why not do weird stuff now and push people around or do whatever, you know?
And also from an anchoring perspective, it just gives you so much more. You know, when you're talking in an office, it's blah, blah, blah on both sides. But people that I've taken to equi-coaching maybe 4 years ago still have images in their head of powerful moments with the horses that still resonate today and that they're still using today as an anchor for certain situations. When we go walking, I have people take back objects from the forest, or if they're into photography, I have them take pictures. And so there's so much more possibility when you're outside to do anchoring. Also, that's a weakness of mine. I'm not very good at the typical NLP anchoring, so I'll bypass it in any way I can. So I'm just looking for other ways to anchor.
Yeah. And Sophie, if you want to do breakout sessions, George, I've seen you. Just hang on a minute for organizational purposes. If you want to do breakout sessions, we kind of need to do it soon.
It doesn't matter to me. It's really what you guys want. I just wanted to see, one, obviously, if there's questions or reflections. And second, I mean, there's a lot of experienced coaches here, so there's probably more stuff that we can share. So it's really up to you. If you'd like to do this like this, I'm totally fine with this. So up to you, really.
Let's take a quick poll. What do you guys think? We have scheduled like another 15 minutes, a little less. Shall we do a quick round of breakout sessions, or shall we just stay here in the panel and continue discussing? What would you like more? So raise your hand if you're for short breakout sessions and then report back. Will be 1, 2, 3. And if you want to stay here, raise your hands.
I think it's a small group, isn't it?
Okay, I will create a breakout session for Dan, Francis, and Joe. No, I'm kidding. So thank you for that feedback. Then I think we'll just, George, hand it over to you.
Thanks. And a quick question, what I'm curious about is, how do you help like individuals in the group, like if to open up, like if they expose themselves, if they have a different energy, let's say they would like to connect more into vulnerability or excitedness, and this dynamics like, oh, what if I'm the outsider, or I be put on the spot, or I'm sharing this in front of my managers and so on. How do you deal with that?
Well, maybe we could ask the group as well, right? I mean, I'm sure there's other people with experiences in this area. Maybe for my part, I would, you know, there's a build up, right? So generally by the time we get there, we'll build some trust in the group. I would, you know, I wouldn't necessarily go straight there. So there's usually some build up with some exercises. I will work in breakouts, small groups before we go to the big group. But sometimes that can be the real, you know, if we have a crash, a bit of a crash in the team, that could be the real breakout. You know, like the example I was giving, this one person who came to the equi-coaching, a young biologist, and I could tell while we were walking to the meadow, she was really not into it. She was, you know, such a face. And I went to walk with her and I said, what's going on? And she's like, look, I love the program, but I'm really not into this. I think this is bullshit. I'm a scientist, blah, 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 blah. I said, okay, fine. Are you willing to give it a go? She's like, I'm willing to give it a go. And this exercise with the horses is a group exercise. So they have to get a horse to a specific place, but they can't touch it, right? And they all think that they need to feed the horse. So they start picking grass, which, you know, there's a lot of grass in the meadow. So whether you put some in your hand or not, it's not going to have a whole lot of effort. But anyway, by the time they get that, and then very often as I see they're not being very successful, I stop the group, I do a pause and I'll say, okay, what's going on? And if they're paying attention, because I'll do a round and say, how is everybody feeling? When they do that, some people will say, I'm frustrated because we're not, you know, successful, and I'm feeling like this, that we're not successful. I noticed this one girl wasn't saying anything, but I just left it. And as we were talking, the horse came closer. And then I draw their attention to that. I said, did you know, anything you're noticing? They're like, yeah, the horse is coming. We've been chasing it all along and now it's here. I'm like, so what's happening in the group? They're like, oh, we're sharing. I said, okay, have another go. And at some point they had another go and then they decided, okay, we've got it. As long as we're a cohesive team and we create safety in the group, the horse is going to come to us. So they all sat down, but the horse wouldn't come. The horse stayed very far away. So they're like, shoot, what's going on? So time out. And again, I did a round, and this one girl who'd been out of the game the whole time said, I am really frustrated. I don't get this exercise. I am so mad at this whole thing. And she starts talking. And the group had not picked up that this is how she felt. And as she's talking, the horse they were trying to get just very slowly walks to the group and just came to that woman and gave her a nudge and just kind of hugged her. And she was like completely... So if you got that kind of a buildup, but then they realize being vulnerable in the group is actually okay, and having a crash where you can say, this is how I feel, and you can even say it emotionally, and the group is able to hold it, it's okay. But I usually will not allow it to happen until we're able to hold it to some degree. So again, it's a question of sort of trying to feel what's going on. If the group is not ready to hold it, then I may just have a break, do something else, but that's pretty much what I do. Does that make sense, George?
Thanks very much.
From an abstract point of view, do I understand it correctly that you're actually mainly using the differences to make the group help each other and so become one?
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, I saw Ray raise his hand and I saw another one. I wasn't sure who's first.
Alessandra.
Oh, Alessandra and Evelina. So let's do Ray, Alessandra and Evelina.
Thanks, Ann Sophie. An inspirational energy and clarity and
Thank you.
Some terrific insights into how you work. I want to acknowledge how you do all of that as an individual and to really celebrate that. I think it's extraordinary. When I get anywhere close to the kind of thing you're describing, I'm typically doing it in a team of trusted colleagues whom I know really well. So I really am inspired by how you've been able to embody and represent and pace and lead and work with people in that way. My question is, do you have a co-facilitator when you're working with horses, or do you do that yourself?
Yes, when I'm working with horses with the team, there's always a co-facilitator, so we never work alone. I'm quite familiar with horses, but I'm not a horse expert, so I have my own horse, but I always make sure that when we're working with the group, we're two. And the other person working with me is the actual horse expert. They're her horses also. So she's constantly watching out for safety, security. That's our primary objective. I would never do it alone. It's just not safe. Alessandra, was that the order? Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi.
Ann Sophie, so thank you very much for this incredible presentation and for the incredible work that you are doing.
Thank you.
I wrote in the chat heroic work because I feel working on this gap is a huge work. It's a huge work. And I can tell myself because I'm in generative coaching, I'm facilitating collective intelligence, generative collaboration. But 10 years ago, I was a physicist working on nanotechnology. So I know that world and it can be very tough. So it took me a personal journey to make it. So hearing from you that you are trying to make it a journey so constrained time for me is wow. And the question is related to this because for me this journey was also a spiritual journey, this transformation. So, and the question is for you, do you feel it also in this sense? Do you feel there is also a spiritual evolution when you do this coaching with in the corporate world or in the scientific world? What's your feeling and what do you experience there?
Depends a bit on what you call spiritual. I think there's a soul dimension. So whenever I'm working with people on this dimension, my whole ambition is to get them to sink into their body, sink into their hearts. And for some of them, that will also mean discovering something else. But honestly, I don't get that with everybody. And that's where I need to be kind of gentle and say, everybody at their own pace. I myself, I'm just really trying to focus on helping everybody kind of take one step forward in terms of getting unstuck. And that's my mission. You know, my mission is helping other people embrace infinite possibilities and choices. And I'm all about movements, you know, helping people get unstuck. For me, that has a spiritual dimension. Whether that has that for other people, I don't know. I do bring the notion of soul quite often, but more from a sense of, what is your mission in the world? What is, you know, what are you trying to create in the world? And I'm hoping that evokes something. But honestly, it's a step by step. But to me, like if I have this session, you know, I'm doing lots of sessions now with this farm company where I'm noticing that all of a sudden they're opening up to energy, to emotions, to feeling. And that to me, I'm not going to judge. For me, then is that enough from a spiritual point of view? I'm like, yes, you know, there's movements. People are waking up. And as long as people are sort of waking up and they're discovering the capability, their capability to observe themselves and to regenerate themselves, honestly, that for me, that's enough. And then it's up to them. Like for me, you know, I know as a coach, how long a journey that is and how much work it requires. So if I can just kind of give a little bit of a push to get them going, and then the rest is up to them to some degree. Yeah. Don't know if that, yeah? Okay.
Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome. Anybody else? I don't know.
We had Evelina on the line.
Yeah, and Sophie, I just wanted to say thank you. I think this is really, really amazing. Listening to the way you work, you know, I just, you know, I want to work with you. You know, I want you to be my coach, right, and experience all of this, you know, that you were kind of guiding through us. It's really, really nice to have a glimpse of that into your ways of working. But I'm kind of also reflecting on how self-critical maybe you are and how humble you are in presenting this kind of magnificent scope of work that you are doing. And clearly, you know, your clients and people you work with get a lot out of it. So kind of just because I'm kind of sensing that bit of you, I'm not sure, you know, how good is the feedback will be and so on. So I just want to reflect on kind of your own process, your own journey throughout the process, and what have you learned throughout all of this? What is your personal growth in guiding others to overcome those challenges?
That's a good question. I'm still in the middle of that, honestly. And I think, you know, that's what I was saying. I was actually grateful to Till that he gave his big word. He pushed me to do this presentation today, because it was a bit of a pit stop for me to kind of take stock. I don't think I would have gone to my coaches and asked them, you know, so it was actually a really good thing. I think different directions, honestly, Evelina. On the one side, there is this sense of gentle, right? Because I do feel there's a big internal critic in me that sometimes, you know, pushes the whip and say, it must be better, it must be more, blah, blah, blah. So gentle. And whenever I do have some people where I do feel, and I'm not even measuring in progress, I'm just always measuring in what is the quality of the relationship and what is the moving ability that we've created together. Right? I'm not measuring. That's why sometimes in the corporate world it's difficult, because at some point we have to go back for a debriefing where the manager says, you know, out of game results, blah, 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 where I know we may have gone through a really worthy process, but maybe the outcome isn't exactly what the manager wanted. But so for me as a coach, I'm constantly looking at quality of our relationship and the extent of moving that we've been able to create. And so for quite a number of people, I know that that's made a difference in how they work and how they live. And that to me is a blessing. I'm just really grateful for that. I also know for some people, it didn't work. So there are also, you know, people in relationships where it didn't take, and I didn't see people move. And particularly today, it's hard because I do sometimes get a number of people that are quite far in crash states, and I can't always recuperate them. So recently I've seen, you know, 2-3 people go into burnout where I sort of had to tell them, stop, you know, we need to see somebody, you need to stop and rest. We're kind of beyond what I can do. And that's always a wake up call for me in terms of, did I see it enough? So that's sort of, and then there's a critical part of me that says, yeah, I do want to make my process stronger. You know, it's coaching is part of what I do, but it's not the only thing. I've got team coaching, I've got training, and like I think all of us, we get stuck in a rut of da-doom. And so I want to think more about how can I focus on the coaching and drop some of the other stuff that I do, so that I can really make this really stand on its own. And so that's the critical part, is sort of, I'm turning 56, I think, this year. So thinking about how can I make sure that over the next 10 years, because generative coaching and this kind of practice is what I believe in. There's still a number of things that I do in my daily practice that are maybe not necessarily what I believe in, but they make money. So it's balancing those two and sort of figuring out for myself, how can I start shifting more and more towards really focusing on this part. So that's the critical, I mean, that's my journey, is gathering up enough belief in myself that I can just focus on that.
And where do you see yourself in, let's say, 10 years time? Where do you see this project being, and maybe what help and support you would like? So, you know, we all can kind of tap into the field of our resources and support your journey with that as well.
In 3 minutes?
No, we don't have 3 minutes, you have 1.
So, you know, think about the picture of the sage crows. I really do look at myself. I want to be my gypsy queen. I want to feel completely free, dance and do my thing the way I see it fit. And I want to bring warm, loving wisdom to the world, right? And whatever helps me get there, that's my intent. So honestly, doing this with you guys and getting all the feedback is already really helpful, because yes, I did have, you know, I do always have doubts. And for the rest, I'm just going to have to see what road takes me there. And I think just continuing to meet kindred people that, you know, we can align and exchange and discuss, that will be incredible help already.
What a steep template to come to a closing. And Sophie, you have brought so many sides to reverberation within me. From the simple thought of, I tell my clients that the coffee at my office is not as good as the coffee down the street, and whoops, we are walking.
There you go.
That always works with coffee drinkers. Yeah. To the thought that it's not success that makes you happy, it's happiness that makes you successful. Thank you, Ann Sophie, again for the marvelous energy and the presentation and the
Thank you for listening.
tight information piece and heart and somatic piece that you brought us. Thanks everybody for coming, and hope to see you again soon in our next session.